Hello, I hope you're doing well today. My name is Ian Green. I'm the musician for Music Dreams and also for Ian J. Green. And today it's my pleasure to work through a beautiful piece of music called the Sonata in G minor, Opus 49, number 1. This is the first movement, as written by Ludwig van Beethoven. This piece can be found in the Celebration Series Piano Repertoire Level 8 book from the 2022 edition. And also it can be found in various other text editions. And the edition that I'm going to be using today for analysis, I will be using from another text edition that contains various sonatinas and sonatas by some of the great classical composers. Let's go over to the sheet music here. And you'll see how I marked in a few things, and then we can discuss how the piece was written based on the form of the music. Now, Mr. Beethoven was, of course, a genius, especially with musical form in the classical period. And especially, he really helped not just to develop the classical form, but also really helped to expand it into a very exciting and enjoyable experience, and also helped to usher in other composers who took inspiration from his writing and built on his foundation that he created during his lifetime. Now, something that was very much a staple of classical music was something called the sonata allegro form. Now, this is usually traditionally the first movement of a sonata or sonatina, in which there are three main structural sections. And this piece, the Sonata in G minor, Opus 49, number 1, falls into that category of structure. So the first part of the piece, right from bar 1, we can call that the exposition, which is the main first part of the piece. So we can put maybe just that, have that clearly on the top of this music. Now, there are three sections to a sonata allegro form. There is something called the exposition, which we outlined in the first bar. There is something called the development section, which starts in bar 34. So we can write down development section in that part. Just writing the word development. And usually with the development section, the composer takes material from the opening themes of the exposition and then builds on that material by going to various key changes, or there are scale patterns and chord patterns that add to what was already written. Then what happens is that the main theme returns with what we call the recapitulation, or recap for short. So that basically means the main themes come back, but there are a few changes that occur in that final section of the piece. And we'll get into that a little bit later. The recapitulation, also known as recap in short form, starts in bar 64. So the development is at bar 34. The recap is in bar 64. Now, the way that the piano exposition works, or the exposition of a sonata works, is there are traditionally two themes that are contrasting, that have different styles and different moods. And theme 1 starts right in bar 1, and it's in the key of G minor. And the theme sounds like this. And there's a recurring theme that continues. So that is a very sad, very lyrical, very beautiful theme. Now, there's a transition section that occurs, and theme 2 comes up in bar 16 in the scale of B flat major, and it's a little bit happier. It's got a beautiful, very different sound. So we can call this theme 2, or Roman numeral 2. Etc., etc. It's a beautiful theme, and it's very much a contrast from theme 1. Traditionally in the exposition of sonata form, which is also used for other solo works for other instruments, and also a large percentage of classical symphonies and other string quartets and other forms use this same musical form, have two contrasting themes. Now, the way that this works as well is that the first theme starts off in the home key, which is in the key of G minor, but then the second theme can either traditionally go to the dominant key, or in the case of a minor piece that's in a minor scale, like this sonata, sometimes the composer uses the relative major scale for theme 2 to create a different mood. Mr. Beethoven accomplishes this. And what happens right prior to theme 2 there's usually some kind of a transitional section. We can call that either a bridge or a transition. And there is a thought with this particular theme 1 that there's a return of theme 1 where the first part is repeated in bars 8 up until approximately bar 14, but then the transition can be thought of as occurring between bars 13 to 16. So what we can do is maybe put a bridge or a transition here. Sometimes this form of where the transition or bridge occurs can be thought of in different ways, and composers don't really follow a specific way of using a bridge, meaning transitioning in a specific way every time that they write a sonata, but there is definitely a transition from the original scale, the key of G minor, to the new key of B flat major to help switch the sound of the next section of the piece. Now, the next part, theme 2, continues all the way to the end of the first page of the piece, right to bar 33, and we have a final cadence in the scale of B flat major with a dominant seventh going essentially to a tonic in the key of B flat major to confirm that key. Now, when we get to the development section, this is where Beethoven has a lot of fun. And he adds some various ornaments, and he also has a beautiful phrase. And he transitions, actually, for the first part of the development into the scale of E flat major, where we add in A flat, and we have different chord patterns that sit within that key. Then he transitions to a few other keys, including C minor. There's a cadence in C minor in bars 49 and 50. And then there's also a transitional section where he then moves back gradually to the key of G minor. We call this the dominant preparation. Whenever we have a recurring dominant chord of the original key that happens right prior or before the return of theme 1. Now, theme 1 comes back in bar 64, so we can write down theme 1 here, and also put down that this part is in the key of G minor. But I would argue that, or say, that the dominant preparation starts all the way back in essentially the sounds of the dominant preparation, where we have a recurring dominant D7 chord start approximately at bar 51. So we could say that there's a dominant preparation here in that part, and it continues all the way to bar 64. Here's what the music sounds like in that section. Still keeps going. So it doesn't really feel like the music finishes or there's a cadence that confirms the key of G minor all the way until we get to bar 64 when the return of the theme 1 occurs. Etc., etc. Now, something that's actually really special is, especially in bar 72, all the way through until bar 75-ish, or even up to bar 79, the left hand has the melody, which is really fun. The right hand has some accompanying patterns. Now, the return of theme 2 occurs in bar 80, but now we go back to the home key of G minor. So we can say that theme 2 starts right here in the beginning of the downbeat of bar 80. And here's the theme. So if I were to play the theme in its original key of B flat major in the exposition, it sounds very pretty, very major. But now what Mr. Beethoven has done is used the form, the sound of that, and the chord changes of that theme, but has transitioned it back into the original key. And that's really a beautiful example of how classical forms really work, especially with the sonata allegro form. When we get to the recapitulation or the return of themes 1 and 2, basically like a rehashing of the exposition, the interesting difference between the exposition theme 2 and the recap theme 2 is that the recap theme 2 is always in the tonic key of the piece. And then what Mr. Beethoven does is he remains in the scale of G minor all the way to the end. Now, something that's really unique is we have a coda, which starts in approximately bar 97. We can call that a coda, or like an ending, an extended ending where, especially in the classical period, and especially with what Mr. Beethoven writes in a lot of his music, he enjoys going from dominant seventh to tonic. Back and forth he goes with some beautiful melodies that really help to create a final moment or a final cadence. But one thing that Mr. Beethoven does is that instead of landing in the scale of G minor, what he does is he actually goes to the tonic major in the last line. The tonic major would be, instead of playing the G minor chord, which is the tonic chord of G minor, you would go to the G major chord, which doesn't really change the key signature, but it changes the mood of a cadence. So a cadence, of course, is the ending of a piece or a phrase. So if we're in this last section, I'll play from bar 97 to the end. So there's a recurring theme in the left hand. It's very sad. Sudden G major is kind of sneakily added to create not really a change of key signature to a modulate to something new, but what he does is he does something that was used in the Baroque period called tierce de Picardie, which means you stay in the minor key all the way to the end, but the last chord you play is switches to the tonic major to create a sense of hopefulness. So I hope that this tutorial was helpful to describe in general terms the different themes and also the form of this piece. So then when you're practicing and enjoying the music, not only is it helpful to know which sections to practice and which details to work on, but also when you're playing the piece to know the structure, to know which theme is which key you're in, and also the moods that fit. I hope that you had some fun, as I certainly did, and I look forward to seeing you next time for another tutorial. Until then, have a wonderful day and take care.